So gather around. Regan's going to do a gallery talk here. So it seems like everybody I talk to already knows Regan. But this is Regan Zerwig, former Jefferson College student and just recently graduated with her MFA from Indiana State University. Has her work up here. This will go through the end of January, I think. So, and then in the spring, she's going to be back. She's going to be teaching for us in the spring, but we're also going to do a little student workshop in the spring with her. So, okay, I'll let you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming and listening to me talk about my art here. Nick kind of summed up a little bit of my experience, but I was born and raised in Missouri, St. Genevieve, south of here, and I come from a line of makers and crafters, and so I usually like to talk a little bit about my family because I think it's important being raised around them and where some of my skills and interests come from. So my mom and dad, they both worked full-time, both went to college, got degrees. My mom was an accountant, still is an accountant. And my dad, he went to a trade school and then worked at Procter & Gamble as an electronics technician. But on the side of work, he did a lot of woodworking and made functional items and still does that today. On my dad's side, my paternal grandfather, he was a tradesman as well. He was in carpentry, and he also did taxidermy on the side, woodworking, and he was a farmer. So my mom and dad live on the same farm that they grew up on, and so that farm has been in my family for a very long time. Well, I always say that my grandmothers are both still quilters to this day as well, and crafters, so they did painting and various other crafts. And my maternal grandfather, he passed away long ago, so I never got to know him, but he was a farmer as well. And so I love talking about that because it leads into a lot of my work, and I like to work in lots of different mediums, and I think that comes from my background too. And growing up, I didn't really know that art was a profession. I didn't know that that was something you could do, you know, as a full-time job. It was something I was involved in as I grew up, the different crafts and arts, going to my grandmother's house. I remember she would be in the living room. I would walk in the door and she would be working on a quilt, a very large quilt, in her living room. And she had thimbles on her fingers and let me put buttons on quilts. And I just always found that very intriguing, and I love to watch her work. And so it wasn't until I went to college that I started to rediscover my love for the arts. And actually, long ago when I came here as a student out of high school, I started studying chemistry, and that's what I thought I was going to go into. And I think a lot of my process and involvement in science and chemistry and math sort of carried over into some of my MFA work. And I hope that you all can go either on my website and look at that, or I even brought a book too that sort of records some of the process behind those pieces and my grad work. So after Jefferson College, I got my associate's degree in gen eds and still sort of didn't know what I wanted to do, but was still interested in the back of my head, really loved art, but was sort of pushed to study in the STEM areas. And my family, I really wanted to make them proud, and I knew that I would make them proud any way I went, but there was always this question of, am I going to be able to make a living off of this? And so when I went to Indiana State University, I started studying interior architecture design. They had a really great program for that, and I thought this might be a good way to combine my interests in art and math and studying buildings. And so I really loved the program. As you got further into the program, they started incorporating computer design. And so I loved the challenge of that, but kept reverting back to, I really like working with my hands. I like producing physical objects and physical art. And so at that time, I had a minor in studio art. I loved my classes, I loved my professors, and decided to flip-flop my major and my minor. And so I finished out my undergrad with studio art and as my major, and then interior architecture design as my minor. And so I think a little bit of my background includes spaces and places and how to incorporate artwork into interior design and these spaces that people exist in. And so a lot of my MFA work includes large installations and works that are much larger than the ones you see here. This is a smaller collection, some old, some newer, but still an adaptation out of all my studies throughout my experience as a student and as a professional as well. And so right after undergrad, I knew right away I wanted to go to grad school for sculpture. And I had known this for a while because I studied under a sculpture professor. His name is Chester Burton, and I will always talk about him because he was a really influential person in my studies and was my graduate advisor and main teacher in my grad school. And so I studied under him, and there my artwork evolved from the pandemic, which was really hard. So the semester before I graduated from undergrad, COVID hit, and my professors, they had to close the studio. And so they challenged us to find material in our everyday lives and create a sculpture from that at home. And so the only thing I could think of and find plenty of was paper. And that was my very first study, if you will, in paper. And so I carried that over into my graduate work. And when I started grad school, it was during the pandemic, right in the heart of it. They were just starting to have classes again with masks and everything. But again, I kept going back to paper because one, it was really inexpensive and I can get lots of it in multiple colors and multiple thicknesses. And it was really quite versatile to work with. And so I started studying origami folds and paper folds. And really a lot of my work after that evolved from these paper structures and studying the folds of paper and the color of paper, shadows, contrast, but using simple geometric shapes and forms as the foundation. And so from there I worked into other materials, concrete, metal, wood, but still including paper in my studies as well. And so here I've been showing some ceramic pieces, some paper pieces, and various other pieces in different mediums. And I love working across a variety of mediums just because it gives me a new way of thinking about artwork and how I want to explore forms, but still kind of keeping these three things in mind when I'm making art: color, geometry, and repetition. And so in a lot of my works, that is what you will see as the foundational parts of my artwork. And even in my MFA, that's what I included in my thesis, which is something you have to do in grad school. And it's a culmination of all your artwork you make and then written in a paper format so that other people can learn about your process and your ideas and who you are really as an artist going out into the world. And so I've loved sharing my artwork throughout the years, being here in Missouri and also at Indiana State and in Terre Haute. And I'm excited to be back in the area after being in Indiana for a while. Right now, I do work professionally as an artist. I've been doing lots of murals, and so incorporating my artwork into large-scale murals, doing some installation pieces on a larger scale, but also smaller pieces too. And I do some design work, which if you'd like to see more of that, it's on my website as well. I would love for you guys to check it out if you have any other questions, or you would like to know about any of the pieces here, please let me know. I'd love to answer questions or talk to you about them. And thank you for being here. Thank you. Does anybody have, anybody have any questions right off the bat? Or any comments or? Don't be afraid. Oh,
I'm sorry. Can you talk about like your color choices in your sculpture work?
yeah, of course. As an artist, I really found an interest in pop art and really related to it as going through a student in this century. And so a lot of my color choices come from pop art, but also when I studied interior architecture design, I had to design lots of spaces and pick out material colors for fabric and paint choices. And so a lot of that stems back to my studies in color theory and color design, and experimenting with what colors work best together and how the eye views colors together. And so in my graduate studies, I studied a lot of artists who also studied color theory. So Donald Judd, Kandinsky. I studied lots of artists, and as you go through your studies, I'm sure you will study and learn about lots of artists, and you will learn who you like and be inspired by different types of artists. So I really go back to pop art and a lot of pop artists, and that's where a lot of my color choices come from.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wish I could show you some of my MFA grad work, because it's really interesting to talk about for me. It's very different from the stuff you see here. But I studied a lot too lighting versus color and how that affects shape and form. And so I learned how to code and program lighting systems for sculpture, and that was something that took a lot of time, and I'm sure some of you may know a little bit about it, but it's not something you can just, I mean, some people might be able to pick it up really quickly, but I wasn't, and so it was this huge learning curve to incorporate that kind of math and arithmetic into sculpture and art making. And so that's something I like to talk about too, is lighting as color and how that can affect your perception of art in the spaces around you. Yeah, that's a good question, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned you were in chemistry, and you obviously said it's very much like fungi.
Yeah.
Like using geometry and origami, like the marriage between nature and geometry in your work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a question.
Yes, and I do look at nature and oftentimes think of geometry in terms of math and science and how those disciplines utilize a lot of those shapes and concepts, and sometimes nature has these really intricate patterns and forms, and I like to look at nature in that way and abstract those forms and take them back to their basic, very simplified version of a triangle, or even this shape here was adapted from a flower, and really kind of looking at it in a more simplified way, and bringing to the forefront color and repetition and that geometric shape. So yes, I find lots of inspiration from forms in nature and in the academic world, chemistry, math, science, all those disciplines. I think they marry very well together in lots of ways in my artwork. What else? Any observations or any particular pieces you are really drawn to? Anybody? The glass, yeah. Oh, yeah. Something about the quality of glass makes everybody's eyes go, ooh. Yeah. So glass is a newer experiment for me in terms of material, but sort of works in a very similar way as paper might. So sort of taking these geometric patterns and utilizing those and putting them into glass forms and creating functional artwork. So yeah, yeah. And the piece behind you there is also glass. So yeah.
Another question, sorry.
No.
When you do your sculpture work, do you think about the space first, then make the work, or do you make the work and then think about the space?
That's a great question, and I often get this question, and I say that it depends is the short answer, because sometimes I don't always get the opportunity to see the space first. As a professional, I have to make a living, and so a lot of the times if somebody commissions a piece, they present me with what they might want, and then I look at the space and kind of go off of their parameters. Not a lot of times have I been able to go into a space and say, oh, I'm going to do an art installation here, and I'm going to do whatever I want. Except for maybe this one here. This one was sort of a very particular case like that. But a lot of the times it will depend on who is wanting the artwork, what kind of artwork they would like in the space, and also the physical location too. There are lots of limits on the type of installation that can be put up. Is there going to be electricity that needs to run? Can you put an installation or a mural on a historical building? Do they have the permits for that? So these are all things that go into that process of what am I going to make for this space? But oftentimes, for example, my MFA work, I did not know what I was going to do with the entire body of work I had. It was very large, I didn't have a storage unit, and I wasn't from the area. So luckily enough, the art curator at another college in Terre Haute really enjoyed the installation pieces, and so she approached me and said, I would like to have all your work on a temporary loan and display it throughout our academic building. And this was at Rose-Hulman, which is an institute for technology, and so a lot of the students really related to some of the pieces because they incorporated mathematics, science, engineering, technology, and art. And so those pieces went over to Rose-Hulman, and I was able to sort of look at their building and decide where these pieces were going to go and where would they fit best. And so in some cases, it also depends on if the piece is already made or if the piece is going to be completely new. And so I will say that it depends. It's always my answer. Yeah. Thank you.
I think just an observation. There seems to be some play with like taking one material and maybe it's going back to the roots of like starting with paper, but taking one material and kind of making it act like a different material.
Yeah.
Like these here, we have the paper that suddenly look like, I don't know. I know they're jewel studies, but yeah, they look rock formation. They're very much not paper-like. And then you have the like origami, foldy, ceramic pieces. And then talking about some of your installations, the big geometric things on the wall that almost look like metal, you know. Are they paper also?
Those are metal.
Oh, they are.
But I did just ask a classroom of students. I showed them the photo and I said, what do you think these are made of? And they said paper. So they do really represent or resemble paper in that way. So when I was starting my grad studies, most of all of my installation pieces that are not paper also stemmed from some kind of folding of paper. So I started on a smaller scale, made a folding, and then would scale it up or create a different kind of installation based on a fold of paper. And so there is this idea of trying to replicate the intricacy of paper and its foldings with other materials and seeing how that translates from material to material. So one of the paper studies I did, I folded a bunch of different types of paper and wanted to replicate it with metal. And that process was very different in the fact that you can't just bend the metal like you can bend paper and create a nice crisp edge. And so I had to create this process of cutting the metal where I wanted the fold to be, welding it back together, and then finishing the edges so that it looked really crisp and clean like a piece of folded paper would. And so a lot of my studies revolved around this idea of how similar can I make this material look like paper, but at the same time transform this material on its own with a different look, and a different sturdiness and hardiness than paper. So these other sculptures that aren't made with paper, kind of looking at the idea of longevity and how long can they last versus this very delicate paper installation.
That mocking up with paper is a very architectural thing to do also. If you see like Frank Gehry doing his paper mock-ups and stuff.
Yeah, and in my architecture classes, we would often start out with chipboard or paper, making maquettes and models of small scale interiors, exteriors, buildings, and creating these models. And so I still like to think that that method and that process translates throughout my process as an artist. Is first I usually make a maquette or a model of something, and then oftentimes we'll scale it up or switch materials that I'm working with. Yeah.
Seems like murals are more popular than ever right now.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the difference between having complete freedom to do whatever you want with your own art versus working for someone and trying to
Yes.
balance that?
Yes. That can be hard to navigate sometimes. Luckily, I have had really great clients, and they've been really open to artistic freedom and expressing my ideas in a way that still incorporates what they need and want in a mural. Actually, when I first started grad school, I couldn't take classes in the summer. They just weren't offered for sculpture students. And so what I would do in the summer is I would paint and I would do murals to make money to pay for my classes when it came around to the next semester. So that is when I started painting murals, and it sort of has just carried on with me throughout. And what I am hoping to do is sort of start to incorporate more dimensionality in the murals. And so I just did one recently that's a little bit smaller in scale, but it includes a paneling system of MDF, which is it's a type of wood, basically packed in sawdust into these sheets that allow you to cut really sharp angles. And so I put these panels on the wall that gave sort of this impression that it's a mural, but it was three-dimensional. And so I hope to incorporate that more into other murals, so long as whoever I'm doing them for likes the idea or can budget for the idea. Sculpture and sculpture making can sometimes get a little expensive because of the price of materials and the time. And so this mural business, I guess, side of me really enjoys the painting process, but also would really love to start incorporating some more three-dimensional elements. And working with clients and customers, since I've been doing it for so long, I've just learned to adapt and base my research off of other artists that were in the area. So I actually had a few other mural artists that I would go to if I had questions or didn't know something, and they taught me a lot about the mural painting process and the different types of paint, the different types of sealer, and different types of finishes, because not all buildings are made of the same things, and so brick versus cement block versus drywall are all very different surfaces, and so you really have to take that into consideration with painting. And so when I first started, I didn't know what to charge for making some money. So I started very, very low, probably, but that's how I got more jobs, is people would hear about me just starting out and that I was affordable. And so I marketed myself that way and was very honest at the beginning, and got more and more practice over time, more and more gigs to paint murals. And the last mural I finished was in 3 days, and it was an outdoor mural. And I use a projector system to trace the image that I create onto the wall, and then paint as much as I can, daylight to. I don't often try to paint in the dark. It's hard, and some areas are questionable, at nighttime. But I've always found the mural painting to be a really good addition to my art making process too. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So with the murals, do you have like a digital approach to it, or does it start from like a paper? Where does it start from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of the times I will start with a digital mural, but I will say when I first started doing it, most of my mural concepts were hand-drawn. So a lot of the times I will start with a very quick sketch, hand-drawn sketch of a concept or two concepts. And then I'll sort of go into the digital world and create something a little more polished in the digital world. So, and I will say it has advancements and advantages, and that's the part that was kind of tricky for me to get into. Is I did a lot of hand drawing and a lot of hand rendering, and so I was challenging myself to sort of go into the digital world because, one, it can shave off a lot of time, and also it looked really clean to present to clients. And when you're working on a portfolio, it's really important to have those beginning sketches, but also to have a really crisp, clean set of designs that you can go into the next client meeting with and show what you have done. And so I do like working in the digital world. I'm still learning a lot, and it's very quick. There are lots of changes that happen in the digital world, so I'm always learning new things with that. Are you a digital art student?
Actually, it's
Ceramicist, okay. Yeah, and I would say too is I use a lot of digital programming for sculptures even too now. Just recently started learning about 3D printing and modeling. Very good for prototyping and making models and maquettes and multiples of lots of things. So yeah, very cool. Anything else? Any other questions, comments? Well, feel free to roam around, take a look at the art. If you're Christmas shopping, these are all available for purchase. Yeah, but thanks again for coming out, and I hope that you have enjoyed the talk and the art. Like Nick said, I will be in the area, and we'll be doing a workshop in the spring, but also teaching the sculpture class starting in January. So maybe I'll see some of you all in January. Very cool. Awesome. Yeah. All right.